Hey listeners, Mallory Willsea here, Chief Producer of the Enrollify Network. I get the privilege of working alongside all of our creators at Enrollify, but I wanted to take just a quick moment to tell you about why I love the Talking Tactics podcast hosted by Diana Kibbolds. Every other Tuesday, Day drops a new episode where she focuses on a single tactic that moved the needle on any enrollment metric, from inquiries and booth visitors to apps completed and deposits, even registrations, you name it. The catch? The tactic had to be done with limited resources, either by a single person or a small but mighty team, or limited time, or maybe without a lot of money. The podcast format is fun and engaging, and it's just different from the more traditional 60-minute interview style shows. If you work in enrollment management or marketing, be sure to give Day's show a listen. You can subscribe to the show by visiting podcast.enrollify.org or just search Talking Tactics wherever you get your podcasts.
Hit it! That's what I'm talking about. Wait!
Okay, now, from the beginning.
Hit it, boys.
Welcome to M&A in Higher Ed, a special 5-part pulse check series on mergers and acquisitions within the higher education sector, brought to you by Enrollify and Element 451. I'm Kin Sejpal from the University of Redlands, and over the next 5 weeks, I will be your guide through the intricate process of institutional consolidation and what it signifies for our industry's future. By examining both the challenges and successes, we can better prepare for the evolving landscape of higher education, ensuring that we navigate these changes in ways that strengthen our institutions and serve our communities effectively. Now, let's jump into today's episode. Hi there, Seth. Good to see you.
Hi, Ken. Great to see you too. Thanks for having me.
So glad you could join us on this topic that I believe you have not spoken much about, but you have so much experience in this space. So I'm glad you are here to talk about mergers and acquisitions from a marketer's viewpoint. I mean, why should marketers actually even care about mergers and acquisitions?
So in the higher ed space, we are a mature market, and so in a mature market, typically markets experience consolidation, and we're seeing that in higher ed right now. So there's lots of headlines around closures. College universities that are closing. My own alma mater announced their closure a couple months ago, but it's not just closures that are on the rise. For folks that have been following the headlines in Inside Higher Ed or the Chronicle, mergers are on the rise as well. So a lot of institutions are merging. Sometimes it's the last resort for a struggling institution, but I think we're now also seeing kind of savvy partnerships emerge from different folks, and so it's become to me just a trend that is growing increasingly. And for marketers, it's super important to care about mergers and acquisitions because first and foremost, you're going to be probably the primary person held responsible for their success or failure, which I don't necessarily think it will impact today is reasonable at all. But the reality is that like people merge institutions with an aspiration of at a minimum maintaining enrollment, if not growing enrollment. And so folks are looking to marketing and enrollment professionals, but we don't always have a seat at the table. And so I think it's just paramount that marketers in higher ed today are tracking mergers and acquisitions, that they have some familiarity with it, and that they're preparing themselves so that way, if or when their own institution approaches them with an opportunity, says, hey, we're looking at possibly acquiring or merging with this other institution, or maybe we're going to merge with somebody else, there's a chance to kind of, make your seat at the table known by providing value, being there, because so much of mergers comes down to the assumption that two institutions coming together can be stronger, right? 1 + 1 = 3. But making that a reality or sobering the conversation and saying, actually, no, that's not the case, and here's why, I think rests a lot on marketers' shoulders. But it's a new territory for most of us, right? There's very few of us in higher ed that have been through this process, let alone been through it multiple times. And so I think we're going to see a lot of marketers over the next few years for the first time being approached, by a president or leadership saying, there's a potential merger opportunity, and marketers being ready to respond to that. I think is going to be really, really important.
Thank you. Well, we definitely dove right into that. For full disclosure, I should make sure listeners know that Seth and I have been partnering on a few things, including his invaluable guidance on mergers and acquisitions that have been going on for the University of Redlands. We've kind of dove into it. I'm on my second merger now in 1.5 years, and definitely was in some uncharted territory to say the least. And Seth having all this experience, we were like, we gotta lean on that. So
Yeah.
what has been your experience? Have you done this before yourself? Are you doing consulting? I mean, you are doing consulting like we just established for
Yeah.
Redlands, but tell us a little bit about that journey.
Yeah, this has been a part of my marketing journey that I didn't anticipate or expect. I think a lot of folks that know my background know my time at UCLA or at Southern New Hampshire University. But I was GM at Helix Education, which was acquired by Ruffalo Noel Levitz. And then prior to founding Kanahoma, which I run now, I was at National University System, which was a nonprofit or is a nonprofit system that included multiple universities. And during my time there, the institution acquired North Central University, which is the nation's largest doctoral institution at the time. And so I have been through, over the course of my career, probably about 5 different M&A opportunities across different organizations, some quite small, and some quite large, like one of the top 3 largest in the past 10 years. But I had to learn it all on the fly, and I was very much in a situation that I think a lot of marketers may find themselves, which is why I'm excited for this conversation today. Where a boss would walk into my office and say, "We have this opportunity," and of course, everyone's already excited, right? By the time it makes it to marketing, everyone wants to do it, and I sort of had to figure out how do I provide value and assess a situation, and so I've been through it a bunch, whether it's acquiring universities or acquiring software. And then, now, as you know, at Kanahoma, I do personally consult on mergers and acquisitions, and have done that on 3 occasions so far since founding the agency, and have definitely enjoyed the work more than I thought. I mean, I remember when I first chatted with you about it, I was like, this is actually an area that I kind of geek out on and love, although it's not exactly a traditional marketer's wheelhouse. It's definitely a something I've learned to really enjoy doing over the last few occasions that I've had to go through that process.
Well, I'm glad you enjoy it because it certainly shows and it's certainly valuable help that I know other organizations can use. So, I mean, from a marketing standpoint, there is a lot more than the promotion. And this is a soapbox I always get on, especially in higher education, where we are called upon for really any sort of promotional activity, whether it's M&A related or not. But even in the case of M&A, there's more than kind of promoting this opportunity as a way to build the brand or to recruit students. There's the whole product piece, there's the
Hmm.
whole price piece, there's just all of these other pieces of marketing that I know you know that and I know that. But talk to me a little bit, and for our listeners, about just the breadth and the scope of what marketers can offer in an entire M&A process.
Sometimes, even in my own past, people would approach me, and they're approaching me sort of like, "Oh, this merger is happening,
Right.
and we want you to weigh in from a brand perspective. Like, how do we need to update the logo, or how are we going to combine the names?" And brand and identity is actually definitely one of the bigger rubs in a merger and acquisition.
Uh-huh.
I'm sure we'll talk about that today. But it's so much bigger than that. When I've been pulled into M&A conversations, and my advice to anybody listening who gets pulled into it is there's a few things that we need to do as marketers. Like, the first is we need to make sure leadership are aligned on the state of the industry as a whole. And so, are we information sharing on the realities of the demographic cliff, and what's happening with stagnation and growth, even almost in many online areas. So are we aligned on declining demand, increasing supply, increasing cost consciousness, or consumer confidence declining for higher ed? Are we info sharing so folks know the realities? So that's the first, is are we aligning folks? Then the second is, when it comes to an M&A, if your institution is looking to acquire another institution, really, it's how do you assess the institution that you're picking up in a meaningful way, and really looking at enrollment performance and trends, looking at the academic portfolio from a demand perspective. I think the academic side of the house is best equipped to evaluate a university's academic program portfolio as far as overall fit. But we as marketers can look at using Google search trends and actually talk about whether or not demand is growing or declining, which competitors are spending in that space. And so you can pretty quickly get really granular. And so, to me, I really focus on that demand side heavily, and
Mm.
understanding the current state of the institution that's being acquired is critical. And I think that's important because
Mm-hmm.
a lot of times folks look at the top line and they look at like how many students does the institution have, maybe where is it located, the buildings, maybe the brand, which are all important things. But what folks don't always do is look under the hood and say, okay, but what's happened in the last 3 to 5 years? And is this institution lost 50% of its student population? Generally speaking, an institution is not interested in being acquired except out of necessity. There are exceptions to that statement, but generally it's, this is not the first choice for institutions. And so if they're coming to the table, it's because they have faced some types of challenges in the past. My past experience has been that sometimes, not always, but sometimes boards or presidents or cabinet are more excited at the opportunity and focusing on the positives. And so like marketers can be a little bit of the contrarian in the room and saying, this is, there's a lot great about this, but when you look at it, here's the programs that are declining, here's the areas where they're losing interest. And the question I think always is it an institution problem or is it an industry problem? And what I mean
Mm,
by that is if it's an institution problem, it means that maybe you could acquire this school and you can correct something, right? Like performance has been declining because maybe they don't have our technology or our knowledge or their marketing strategy hasn't been strong. Okay, those are all solvable things. But on the flip side, what if the things they're experiencing are declines in macro industry trends, right? So like demand for those programs overall are declining, or there's a reason that like education attainment is declining in the region that the institution operates in. Those
mm-hmm.
kind of things can be missed because a lot of times folks move fast through the process. So I think marketers' jobs is much bigger than just brand or identity. It's to understand the performance of the institution being acquired, to educate and align leadership as best as you reasonably can with information to make sure that folks know the full reality of what's happening. And I think that's really the key thing is to be like of counsel. It's not a marketer's decision, right? This is a board's decision, not even a president's decision on their own, right? This is like board level kind of things. So the marketer is like, can we just be the person in the room that helps everyone understand what's really going on as best we reasonably can see it? And I think marketers just think differently in the weeds. We think about growth in a real tangible way. Sometimes we get saddled with, grow 10% next year and nobody asks how, and we're the ones who have to figure out how. And so I think bringing that kind of conversation forward is the key thing for marketers. And I tend to always think about that. So current state performance, trends, industry versus institution, those are kind of the core areas I lean on first when I think about like how a marketer can provide value for folks going through the M&A process.
All great points. I mean, marketing does provide strategic value. So I think we established that once again.
Yeah.
And
Totally.
and marketers are, if they don't have a seat at the table, to at least give that data and that viewpoint and that counsel. I think then marketers, in my mind, should not be held accountable to those goals that are set for that institution from a marketing standpoint. So, I mean, that goes to really any other conversation we have around if you're not at the table to determine what our strategy is going to be, what our program mix is going to look like, what our enrollment
Hmm.
targets are, what the demand is, then you cannot be saying, well, we did not meet our goals because marketing kind of dropped the ball on there. So that really goes back to that fundamental strategic value that marketers bring to any type of discussion, but particularly a big one like an M&A. But
Hmm.
you're right. I mean, it's bringing all the information they can to the table and providing as broad and comprehensive of a view as possible. In that vein, then you touched on some of the data that could be helpful to
Yeah.
make this decision. But there are some things that are not just about data, right? You
Hmm.
said look under the hood, get a sense, get a feel for what's happening. Not everything is available
Yeah.
not everything is visible, and not everything is accessible, especially to the marketers, because it's like, okay, I'm gonna protect this piece because it's
Yeah.
why do you want to know this? Or I think there's a lot of diplomacy and tact
Yes,
also that
totally.
comes into play, which I know you've navigated masterfully in your past life. What's the best way to get to some of this information you just talked about?
I think a key question if you're a marketer and this is coming up is to ask your leadership, like, can I lead the marketing diligence?
Mm,
So in a diligence process, when one organization is being acquired, this is well beyond M&A just in education. You go through a diligence process where there's some kind of letter
Right.
of intent, and then you both agree to open up your books to a certain degree. To your point, it is not always perfect. And sometimes the information doesn't exist, and other times it might be just hard to find, intentionally or unintentionally. And so the first one I think is, and I learned this only halfway through my career, is that like marketers can say, like, I want to lead the marketing diligence. Generally speaking, leadership will say, sure, like, of course, you're the head of marketing. And then the question is, well, what does that entail? And so in my past, I like to create basically a marketing and enrollment diligence report. And it's
mm,
sort of like, okay, you're sending me in, imagine you're, McKinsey and you're a consultant getting parachuted in, and it's my job to assess the situation. And so I start that work with looking at typically like audits, and so I do focus on the facts that I have. And so I would encourage folks, I in the reports I put together, I literally have a thing called the state of the institution, where I do portfolio audit. What are the programs they're offering? Market demand analysis, like what's the market's demand for those programs, which we can find and you can find as marketers by looking at Google Search Console. Then we do brand audit analysis, like how's the brand look and feel? Is it have good collateral, good photos, good videos, or does it need to have a refresh? Is it dated? Are there problems with it? We do a web audit. A lot of times an institution that has been struggling financially has not made the kind of progress they need to maybe on the web front. That's actually a good thing because you may be able to say like, oh, if we redesign the homepage or some parts of the website, we can immediately improve performance, right? Because they're
mhm,
not doing things that your institution knows. So you want to look at it through the lens of like, what do we know as marketers? We'll do it. I'll do an enrollment audit of like looking at just take each program's enrollment performance. Ideally, if you can get it like lead, app, and start, and look at it for the past 3 to 5 years, and just like literally like line chart, like view it, like what's going up, what's going down, and then a little bit of an assessment of the team and the technology and the operations. So I kind of focus there. But I really want to call out your point that like not all of it's data driven. In all the reports I put together, I have a section called key considerations, and I would
mm,
really encourage folks to do the same thing. And that's where I allow subjectivity to come in, and like that's my advice as a marketer. So the state of the institution side is like, hey, we went in and did an audit. Here's what we're seeing. Here's the strengths. Here's the weaknesses. It's a glorified extended SWOT analysis with whatever information exists. But then there's a section in these reports called key considerations where it's like, okay, it's time for me to call it out. Like maybe we're concerned about declines in traditional student population already. Maybe the programs that they're offering, there's really not as much demand for it. Or maybe there's good things, right? Like this would be a really good fit with our institution's program portfolio. Maybe it's calling out things they're not doing at all and saying things that we think we could do. Like maybe they're not doing brand marketing. Or
mm,
maybe you think you could drive improvements on their website from a conversion rate optimization perspective, or maybe they're like sending, this has happened to me before, they're sending manual emails. They're not even doing automated email marketing to their enrollment funnel. It's like, well, of course, automation will improve performance, but it's how do you sign up for how much, right? And that's a really hard thing to do. And so, in the key consideration side of it, that's where I just kind of throw out my personal opinions of like, this is my advice. And I think it's really important for a marketer to do it, but most importantly, to provide counsel and guidance to the leadership making the decision. No question. That's your most important priority. But the second is you're going to be the one held responsible, whether or not it's on your shoulders. So this is sort of your document of calling out all the things. So if 2 years from now the merger has happened and there's a problem, you said, well, remember, I mentioned in the report that this was an issue. We needed a new CRM, as an example, that we couldn't, we would need a new website. We decided not to invest in a new website. And so we shouldn't be surprised that performance. So it just allows you to sort of like make that wish list of like, these are the things we would need to do to make this successful and feel heard. The other thing I would note, and finally about doing a marketing diligence report, and by you could format it however you want, is everybody reads it. And in my experience at higher ed, there's a lot of times you do a lot of work and like people don't read everything you put together. You know what I mean? But boards are very engaged on acquisitions. Presidents and
Oh,
cabinets are
yeah.
very engaged. And so
mhm,
what I love is like it's very time intensive work. But it's basically your chance to write a giant report with all the data you can find, all the inputs you can find, and your advice and opinions, and actually be heard by everybody that's making the decision. It's probably the only time in my marketing career that it happens consistently. Actually, maybe I'm uncovering like a personal thing about me, like why I love M&A so much is like I actually feel like the marketer voice is heard in this process. But that's my advice in a nutshell is like ask to lead the marketing diligence, create some kind of report outline of the information you want to go look for, try to go get it, write some kind of report and let people read it. And at a minimum, you'll be well informed and folks will be informed of your opinion. And that at a minimum, I think is going to really benefit the process overall.
Hey everyone, it's Mallory. I'm hosting the Engage Summit this summer in Raleigh, North Carolina. The theme of the conference is AI Got You. We're not just talking theories. This conference is your guide to understanding and applying AI at your institution. By the end, you won't just get AI, you'll be ready to lead your campus through an AI transformation. It's for everyone who wants to use AI to level up everything you're doing. Whether your focus is to recruit or retain, the summit offers a platform to learn, network, and bring back actionable insights to enhance your student engagement strategies. I hope you'll join me and some of your favorite Enrollify creators in Raleigh on June 25th and 26th, like Jamie Hunt, Dustin Ramsdell, and Allison Tercio. Use the discount code Enrollify50, and you can register for just $99. So join us at the Engage Summit this June. Learn more and register at engage.element451.com. We can't wait to see you there.
Yeah. That's interesting and funny, but not so funny about the
Right.
fact that
Yeah.
people read this report, but can't say that about a lot of other things we do. And
Yeah.
I'm like, oh dang, how do we how do we get that level of attention
Yeah.
there? But no, all valid points. We may have listeners here who are on the side that is being acquired,
Yeah.
right? And that's okay because they are trying to either do this as a part of like, okay, here's where we are in a state of the institution. The best path forward is for us to merge into another
Sure.
institution. And, especially if they are on the brink of closure, which I'm sorry that your alma mater had to close before they took some of these concrete steps. I don't know the
Me too.
backstory. I'm not going to
Yeah.
speak on that. But what is their value and their role? A lot of them have marketing staff
Yeah.
and or leadership,
Yeah.
and they might feel like they are on the hook to really quote unquote sell their institution, and
Mm.
that's figuratively and literally, in a way that is enticing and portrays the true reality of the situation, but also they need to help the acquiring institution understand
Yeah.
the equity that they bring from a marketing standpoint.
My advice to marketers on the side of being acquired, if your institution is potentially being acquired, is a few things. Like, first, know what to expect, which is that you're not going to have a lot of information at first, and then someone's going to show up and they're going to create what's called a data room, and they're going to ask you to upload like every file you can imagine into this basically glorified online folder, where the folks who are acquiring you can go through and review that data, and then they'll have calls with you to ask questions about things that maybe don't make sense. So at a minimum, know that you're going to have to track everything down. So the first thing I would do is I'd try to get really organized with the materials that I have. And sure, I would focus on that first because people are going to come and ask for, give us your style guides or any information you have on the website, like past marketing reports, any research you've done. They're going to ask you to do it, go back and organize all that.
Contracts and all.
That's a great call. Every contract for every vendor you have is going to
Yeah.
be requested. The breadth of it is wild. So that's coming. The second thing I would say though is that like the narrative around that is really important, and so like you should have some counterpart on the acquiring side. So typically it's someone like myself who's leading marketing diligence, but there's not always a marketing diligence person. Sometimes it's just a diligence team. Build rapport and a relationship with them. Look for what they're looking for. Ask them like what they're trying to understand, and be upfront and as honest as you feel comfortable. I would say be as honest as you can be. If your institution's encouraging you to kind of pull a narrative, that's your line to walk. But generally speaking, I would say like you want to share as much as you can share and include the narrative. And this is your chance. This is my biggest advice. This is your chance to share the wish list of all the things you've been asking to do for the last few years that didn't get approved because there wasn't budget or buy-in. Because those are all like dials that they could turn. And so the most success I've had in M&A has been when folks in the marketing side say, here's all the things that are going on. Here's our weaknesses. And they're upfront about them. And then they say, but here's the 4 or 5 things that I know that if we do this, we can immediately improve performance, because anyone who's going through the acquisition, as I mentioned earlier, is looking to improve the performance overall. And so if you can show up with a list of low hanging fruit and saying like, here's 4 or 5 initiatives that I know are going to move the needle, and we're prepared to help implement that. We just need the resources to do it. Not only will it increase the confidence in the acquisition, but also there's a good chance that what you're trying to do will be funded through the acquisition. So when there's an acquisition of one institution to another, most often, a board will release funds and say like, okay, this is the amount of money to help manage this process because it's a lot going on, and so it's often in the millions, and I've seen it in the tens of millions of dollars that are set aside to support an institution's growth through a merge acquisition. So if you're being acquired and you want that new CRM or you want that new website or you need a new production, this is the time to get those bullets on a list somewhere. So that way, when you're acquired and hopefully you're retained and you stay on and you support, you finally get to do all the things you wanted to do. And so as a marketer, it actually can be really exciting to go through an acquisition because it can be the chance for you to finally get to do all those things you've been asking to do. And it can actually like free up the road in front of you to move really quickly. And so my advice would be get organized and then get excited, because I actually think this process can be a real positive one, especially if you're able to demonstrate your own, kind of expertise and knowledge of the institution, and be as, just positive and proactive and partnership oriented as you can be in the process. So that'd be probably where I would start.
Great call outs. I think there is so much positive that can come out of it from the acquiring side too. It's not like, oh, here I'm handing over things and now you can make these decisions and run
Yeah,
with it. But here's
exactly.
how we can collaboratively chart the path forward for collective success. And even from a staffing standpoint, I feel like we talked about resources and budgets and buy-in. Sometimes that happens even on the staffing side. They don't have the capacity to execute some of the initiatives that they may have outlined.
Hmm.
And perhaps the acquiring institution has a better, let's say, more scalable operation that allows for some of that to take place in a way that it doesn't add more cost necessarily, but it just now you have more manpower
Yeah.
to accomplish the same tasks. So we can't talk about marketing without talking about brand, and we did touch on
Yeah.
that, and you did touch on that too. And you mentioned at one point that it was, that does become a little bit of a rub, but institutions, especially now, I mean, they've all spent time, energy, a lot of money in defining their unique value proposition, their core brand essence, and such. And so when it comes to now, you have to integrate those, and now your unique value proposition can't be unique in a sense that it can't merge with another institution. How do you get past that? You don't want all that work to go to waste. You still want to retain some of the core elements that make you who you are. And on the visual identity, let's say there are some discussions, many discussions and many points of view. how
Yeah.
do you how do you have those conversations, and how do you get to hopefully a win-win situation?
Yeah, this is like definitely probably the area with the biggest spotlight on it for M&A for marketers
Hmm.
is how do we integrate the brands? And everyone's going to show up with an opinion. I've had, leadership come and tell me, "Oh, we should name it this, or we should change the name, we should keep the name, we should do it." Everybody weighs in because it's like such a forward-facing component of the process that everyone's going to see. So expect everyone, including board members, to have an opinion. So I break it up in like kind of probably, I'm thinking, three areas. I break it up in like a brand strategy conversation. Then I think
Hmm.
about visual identity, and then I think about messaging. From a brand strategy perspective, this has probably got to be decided pretty early on, which is, the first question is like, are we going to be a branded house or a house of brands? A house of brands would mean that your institution is going to acquire this other college or university. It's going to operate fully independently forever, and it's going to be its own brand operated by you. That is almost never the case, but it's good to confirm that first, saying like, do we have any interest in managing this university without our name appearing anywhere? Almost everyone's going to say no. Okay, so
Hmm.
okay, then you could like cut off that option. That independence is not an option. And then the question is, there's some kind of merger. There's a complete merger where the institution is going to totally go away. The name's going to go away. It's all going to go. It's going to be gobbled up by the acquirer. That happens only some of the time, and it happens over a long period of time. And so the thing to confirm is that, like, okay, what we're talking about is we want to retain the equity in their current brand while establishing the relationship with our brand and like moving us forward in a place where it doesn't get confusing over time. That's like a really not great answer, but that's the right answer. Like, and so like you want to align leadership that the brand strategy is like, let's maintain their brand value while establishing the relationship and heading us in a direction that unifies us over a very long period of time. It could be 5, 10 years longer, like, but we're heading in a place where we're coming together. So that's the strategy piece I would align on first. The second thing then comes down to like visual identity and how you structure and communicate that. I look at that always in phases. The first phase is steady state. It's super important to understand, and this is a thing you have to educate leadership on from a brand perspective, is that when you acquire an institution, the approval process from the Department of Education is quite lengthy. And it happens in stages. And so you can be involved in helping run that institution before you officially are overseeing them. And so that means there's like a phase one, which I would call steady state, which is like, look, they're pretty much going to operate on their own. We're going to probably have some information on the website on how they've merged, and they're now working with us. Maybe we can put something up on the homepage header about like, announcing things, and like, but like the first phase is pretty much,
Pending approval with some of the,
yes,
making sure
exactly.
your legal counsel looks at that language before you put it out
Yeah,
there. But
this is all
yeah.
exactly. So that's so it helps. This is good to let people know because like leadership will want to like launch a new logo next week, and you let them know like we can't do that, and so that'll calm nerves, which is good. So then the second phase to me is like is acknowledging the partnership while maintaining the equity in the first brand. This is really, really critical because when people think about the equity in the brand being acquired, it's not just like, oh, they have students and alumni and faculty and staff that love the institution. That's
Mhm.
important because
Mm.
that they drive referral. And so I will say that's very, very important. But there's a second component of that, which is branded search volume. And so like when
Mm.
you're looking at an institution being acquired, you should go look at Google Trends and see how many people are searching for that institution. Because the reality is if you change the name, people may or may not stop searching for it. And like if you lose referral and you lose organic traffic, you're going to lose the primary source and driver of volume for new starts for most institutions. And so like if you just change the name overnight, like you could literally decimate incoming performance, because
Yeah.
performance is disproportionately driven by organic and direct and referral. And so to me, phase one is like keep the name, probably focus on that, but establish a connection. And so you can talk about the name doesn't have to stay the name. You could take the college university's name and you could call it a college within the acquiring institution. It could be a school. It could become a campus. That all depends on the contingencies of your unique situation. But I've seen it before become the here's the name college of blank, or here's the name school of blank, or your university name blank campus. And so all those things can factor. And so I think that's like brand strategy into identity. I would encourage you to probably in that first identity phase, maybe introduce your brand colors, but don't change the logo as an example.
Mhm.
Like that's a common way to establish a relationship, but let them maintain a visual identity. So like phase one is steady state. Maybe phase two is acknowledge the partnership, alter the name, but don't remove the name, and then incorporate your brand colors as an example, but maintain their logo. And then phase three would be maybe transitioning to the mother brand, which is like, okay, they're not going to have their independent identity, and we're going to really move them over as a college or as a school. The reality is these are unique for each situation. And so I would encourage you to really think about the nuances of this. I'll also say there is no right or wrong answer here. This is one of the areas in marketing that is the most based on conversation and subjectivity. And so, like, even as a marketer, I can be swayed on what makes the most sense here, if that
Right.
makes sense. So, um, at the same time that you're doing that visual identity, I should note that's what everyone's going to care about outside of you. They're going to want to see you mock up new logos and show them. And sure, you can do that with your team, and hopefully they look great. But there's other work you have to do in parallel. So that first is brand strategy. The second is identity. That third is really messaging and positioning. Because the reality is what you want to look for is like, what are the similarities with the institution you're acquiring and yours? And where does their brand story match with yours? And then also, where are their unique differentiators? And like, how are you going to accommodate for that? Because ultimately, if it's one brand, which I think is, I hope, the aspiration for most folks going through an acquisition, then you should look and say, okay, if this is our current brand positioning, where does the acquired institution match with that? And hopefully there's a lot of synergies. That should be a factor in whether or not you should move forward in M&A, not just if there's good value and good enrollment. It should be like fit from a position perspective. But then secondarily, where are their differentiation? And let's say there's a differentiation that acquired institution offers different academic programs than you do, or they have a different approach. Then you have a great question of whether or not that is going to become a subsidiary brand. So maybe they become a
Mhm.
campus name or a college name, and that's just going to be positioning for a subsidiary component of your brand. Or does that level up and actually change your institution's brand overall? So sometimes
Mm,
what you're acquiring is so critical that it can actually change the way you talk about it. So, in my past, I worked for an institution that was predominantly undergraduate and master's programs that acquired a very large doctoral portfolio. We
mhm.
had very, very few doctoral programs before. That changed the brand of the overarching institution because
Right.
suddenly they were a dominant doctoral provider. And so that's an example where positioning can alter the overarching brand, and other times it only alters a subsidiary brand. And so the challenge is for the marketer listening to this, you're not going to be asked to do any of this work except come up with a new logo. And so you have to wedge in and be like, hold on, let's
Yeah.
talk about the strategy. Let's talk about the naming options. Let's talk about how this works in phases. And by the way, I'm going to go ahead and do this positioning work because it's all the right thing to do, but it's just not going to be top of mind for anybody outside of.
Again, comes back to the strategic value that there is more to this. And one of the things that I heard from another colleague who said, when you decide to acquire an institution, or on the flip side, you have options to be acquired and you decide to go with a particular institution. In either case, I think the value of the institution needs to stay constant, because you're not anything you do that devalues the institution as you go through the process, your outcome is going to be different and ideal and less than ideal. And so my I use that same filter when thinking about a brand. Like, if your brand health is strong and the brand affinity is strong and based on, not just subjectivity but other things, but then if you do certain things that are going to devalue it, then what you're acquiring or merging into are going to be affected, and your bottom line is going to be impacted.
Yeah, yeah, completely. And it's a really good call out because I think it's important to note that mergers are often not successful. And that depends on how you define success and who's
Yeah.
assessing it. But it's not just enrollment growth. Oftentimes I have seen mergers come through that they create brand confusion where you've alienated the students and alumni of the institution being acquired while also confusing the public on the overarching brand that did the acquisition. You can find yourself in a worse spot than when you started. That is a real possibility here. And so I think this work is super critical because success is not guaranteed when it comes to M&A in our space.
True. Well, the strategies you outlined here, especially on the brand front, but also on the marketing front, I mean, it can feel like a lot. And it is a lot to take on, but it is the right thing to do. So, you know, we don't have M&A teams like corporates do
Yeah,
that do this all day, every day, and they seek out partners and figure out the whole soup to nuts process, implementation, diligence, etc., etc. So I guess, for marketers and communicators who have this daily job of running their own campus
yeah,
and making sure the current goals are being met while they're trying to also collaborate and integrate with another institution, w- what can they do and how should they accomplish this added work, or what feels like added work
yeah.
on top of everything else they have to do, so that their current efforts are also successful on their own campuses?
Yeah, this is there's no easy answer to that question. That's the $1 million question because typically this is such a huge time investment. It can be quite a distraction. So I think there's a few things you could do on if you're on the institution side. One is you can advocate for external resources. I would encourage you not to give up your role in the process. So I would encourage you to not say, oh,
Mm,
just go hire someone else to do this. If you can get a seat at the table, this is probably the biggest thing that's going to happen to the institution for the foreseeable future and possibly for your entire tenure while you're there. It's a huge deal. And so this is your opportunity to step into that role. So I would try to step into it while asking for resources. So, people hire me, and there's other folks who could come in and be helpful, but not to take over the process and do it independently, but to be a partner in that process. That's an option. Your team can be an option. reprioritize what's on your team's plate, or ideally, I would encourage you to outsource other things. Like, don't hire people like me at all if you don't need to. You can do it, but hire other things out within your team
Mm.
if the best you can. So I would advocate to leadership the need for resources. It's really unreasonable to go through an M&A process and not resource the team in some capacity. So like advocate for that as best you can, but try not to lose your seat at the table. If you could put in a little bit more time or effort, I would encourage you to do it. But a lot of us are doing that already. And so if you can't, like, I get that. And so I would say advocate for resources, advocate for time, but also try not to be the naysayer in the room for the deal when it comes to process. Like, these deals work on timelines that don't make sense. We're asked to make decisions with half information. And
Mm-hmm.
those are realities of mergers and acquisitions as a whole. That's not specific just to higher ed. So don't just be the person that says, well, I can't get you an audit of their website for 2 months. Like, if they need an audit of the website in 2 weeks, just say, here's what I can do in 2 weeks. And it's not perfect, but understand that, like, great is the enemy of good when it comes to mergers and acquisitions that are on a tight timeline. And so, like, understand that your expectations may be shifted, and the outcome that you're producing should be shifted to meet whatever the inputs are that you have for time or resources. So, and then the only thing I would say is, it could be like a lot. It could feel frustrating. I would encourage people to think about the fact that, like, I think this is actually extremely exciting. I hope you stay at your institution a long time and you're happy there, but it makes you tremendously employable. This is, rapidly growing trend in our space. Very few marketers have experience in this. Like, this is very unique. This is a real resume builder. It's a real career opportunity. Some people never go through this. Some go through this once. And so it's a really interesting career opportunity. So as best you can, get excited about it, but get resourced and put a plan together, and then just go easy on yourself. Like, understand that, like, people are looking for the best you can do in the time that you have. So, perfect is probably not part of this process.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, incomplete information is certainly something that comes with the territory. What I'm hearing is, if you're offered a seat at the table, grab it. And if
Yeah.
you're not offered a seat at the table, ask for it.
Yes.
So I think that's a great note to end this on. Seth, obviously, this is a topic you know a lot about, but also the passion that you have for this topic is very evident. So I know we could talk about this all day, and we may have over
Yeah.
time talked about this time and time again about just all the things that we can think about and do, and the philosophies accompanying it. But if listeners want to pick your brain on this topic, can they do so? And if so, where can they find you?
Yeah, always. People can reach out to me anytime, especially about this topic. You can find me online. LinkedIn's probably the best place. I'm just Seth Odell on LinkedIn, but I'm also on X, and you can find me on Instagram or anywhere else. But you can email me at seth@kanahoma.com or reach out on LinkedIn. It's probably the two fastest ways I'll get back to you. And I'm down anytime, even if it's just like, hey, I'm running through this. Do you have any advice for me? Or I have an outline together for my own diligence report. Do you want to look at it? I'll always be down to help people with that stuff. So I would always be open and welcome any conversations about that anytime.
And I can attest to that. Seth has been more than willing to lend a hand or a ear as needed.
Definitely.
All right, Seth, this was great. Thank you again so much. And I hope that this work continues, but continues in a way that only elevates the importance of marketing as a strategic function.
Yes, I completely agree. And I think it's a super important conversation. And just thank you so much for having me and let me be a part of it.
This Pulse Check mini-series has been brought to you by Pathify. Gone are the days of clunky interfaces, disjointed systems, and massive, unhelpful link farms. Centralize all your systems with Pathify so that students see the information that matters to them in a digital experience that actually makes sense. From prospective students through alumni, it's about time the student experience started looking and acting like a consumer app from this century. Visit pathify.com for more. Enrollify is made possible by Element 451, the next generation AI student engagement platform helping institutions create meaningful and personalized interactions with students. Learn more at element451.com.